Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as mentioned, I had the pleasure of attending the conference in 2012 in Washington. So it is a real pleasure for me to be able to be here today and to participate in the Third World Conference of Women's Shelters. Plenary Session 4 is all about the importance of international cooperation. It's about our ability to work together, to share best practices, to share our knowledge and experiences, and to make local, regional, and global commitments in our efforts to stop violence against women and girls around the world. In 2000, the UN General Assembly agreed on 8 Millennium Development Goals. The MDGs were revolutionary in providing a common language to reach global agreement on achieving progress in the world's developing countries. And we have made significant progress. But that progress has been far from uniform across and within countries, and the goals that lag the most are those goals that had women and girls at their core. Goal 3 was to promote gender equality and the empowerment of women. Surprisingly, there was no specific target directed at eliminating violence against women and girls. Now, awareness of violence has grown over the past 15 years and has been increasingly recognized as a global epidemic of alarming proportions and as an urgent human rights and public health priority. And today, legal prohibitions are more extensive, but gaps remain, and political will has been intensified. But the reality is that much more needs to be done, both for prevention and for response. Despite this mobilization and intensification of commitments, 1 in 3 women worldwide have experienced physical or sexual violence, the vast majority at the hand of her husband or partner. Globally, as many as 38% of all murders of women are committed by intimate partners. Nearly 1/3 of adolescent girls who have been in a relationship have experienced violence at the hands of their partner. And the first sexual experience of up to 1/3 of women is forced. Shocking numbers. And it's so important that we remember and recognize the individual and their stories that these numbers represent. We need to understand the dynamics behind these numbers if we want to change those numbers. Violent behavior is strongly influenced by our cultural and social norms. That is, rules of expectations or behavior within our societies. Unspoken social standards of appropriate and inappropriate behavior that govern our interaction with others. We know that large shares of women, men, and young people in various countries still believe violence is justified for reasons such as a woman leaving the home without permission, or that she's burnt the dinner to that evening's meal. Globally, nearly half of adolescent girls aged 15 to 19 think a husband or partner is justified in hitting his wife in certain circumstances. And in many societies, female children are valued less than men. Communities continue to adhere to harmful traditional cultural practices, such as female genital mutilation and child marriages. The complexity of violence is obvious. Violence against women remains chronically underreported, and information on laws addressing gender-based violence is also sparse. Hundreds of millions of women live in countries where domestic violence is not a crime, or where laws do exist, enforcement is lacking. Constitutional change and strong legal frameworks are fundamental, but alone haven't been able to change the statistics. Let's take the example of child brides. a clear breach of human rights, and a social norm closely linked to partner violence. And I'd like to use this example to demonstrate how legislation and social norms can contradict one another. In many countries, child marriages are technically illegal. However, girls continue to be married off before they're 18, and many before they are 15. Why is this when the law is so clear? Well, in these countries, the law is rarely enforced, and there often exists a silent acceptance of child marriages amongst officials, communities, and leaders. But something else is at play: social pressures and tradition. In many countries, a girl education is not seen as important as her role is in the house. Unmarried girls are often sexually harassed, and marriages are seen as a way to protect them and ensure respect for them. And if a girl is not married by the time she is 18, her prospects of finding a partner are often very limited. A mother of a 15-year-old bride said that she saw nothing wrong with the marriage, as it is normal in their community. She believed that this marriage was the best for her daughter and her daughter's future. Social pressures are extremely strong and binding. To not adhere to them is often a harder decision to make than breaking the law. Therefore, a change in social norms and traditions must form any part of a solution to end violence against women and girls. Violence does not discriminate, but takes place in all social spheres, in all cultures, and in all countries. Take my country, for example, Denmark. We have strong legislation and enforcement in place. We have an impressive record on gender equality. Culturally and socially, violence is condemned and not accepted, and it's an area with focus and a broad range of organisations and initiatives established to combat violence against women and girls. Despite this, more than 7% of young Danish women who have been in a relationship have experienced violence at the hands of their partner. And 35% of women fleeing to a women's shelter have been there before. And still, many women remain silent about violence. So these figures are much higher in reality. So why does violence continue to persist in an environment where socially and politically it should not be able to? Now, there's no simple answer, but part of it is that in Denmark, violence continues to exist in the dark. There's still so much shame and blame associated with intimate partner violence, and it's just not something we talk about. So even though a country like mine that has made great strides, we still need to break the silence and confront the social norms that silence victims. We need women, men, girls and boys to recognise and say no to violence, whether they are victims, survivors, perpetrators or bystanders. We must stand together and speak out about violence. In other words, we need to create a paradigm shift. I find it perplexing that men are often erased from the discussion when we talk about violence against women and girls. Men need to more actively take part in this discussion, not as part of the problem, but as part of the solution. This must be a joint agenda. The majority of men are not violent. We need that majority to challenge the minority who are. So let's go back to looking at attitudes and norms. When men challenge men, it works. When men lose status in the eyes of another man, it works. So we need men to speak out. We need them to talk about violence and to react when they witness not only violence, but also the norms supporting the violence. Secondly, we need to support men in stopping their violent behaviour. If we can remove the cause, we can change the effect. Violence and powerlessness are deeply connected. In spring, I met with 4 Danish men who had all been violent in their intimate relationships. I met them at a group session of the Danish organization Dialogue Against Violence, and they were attending a program aimed at changing their patterns and ending their violent behavior. These 4 men succeeded. From not one day to the next, but by continuously working over a longer period with anger management and self-awareness. To this day, they still feel the same anger that used to end in violence. And that anger will probably always be with them. But now they are able to recognize it early enough to control it. Now, even though it can be difficult to understand, we have to accept that the greatest wish of many of the women living with a violent partner is for the violence to stop and for the family to remain together. By supporting these men, their families are today still living as a family with their challenges, but free of violence. It is a sensitive issue, I know. Helping violent men can be seen as shifting focus away from the women, the victims, the survivors. Working with perpetrators of violence should never compromise the support and work to empower women who have been victims and survivors of violence. That goes without saying. In some cases, men are not ready or open to being helped. But we need to start addressing the fact that violent men, not in all, but in some cases, can be helped. With the right interventions, behaviour can change. Last year, I visited South Africa and a small local NGO called Brothers for Life, an organisation that engages men and boys as agents of change. Through their work and dedication, they have mobilised local communities, primarily men, to change behaviour and find alternative strategies to resolving conflict within their near relations, and with really good results. It was the words of the men who today embrace their roles as fathers and husbands that had the greatest impact on me. And I would like to share the words of one of the brothers as they refer to themselves. He was an older, charismatic man, actually a relatively well-known actor. And he described himself as an experienced wife-beater from a long line of abusers. He went on to say, "I was blessed to join this program, and today I am a transformed perpetrator. If I can change, so can they." Brothers for Life's core is that no man is born violent. Violence is something that is learned through observing our parents, through men who are believed to be role models within our communities, and through the manner in which the mass media represent gender relationships. By communicating the message, a real man is protective towards women, Brothers for Life successfully links non-violent behaviour to masculinity and creates positive new role models. Their aim is to break the cycle of violence through mobilising communities to adopt a zero tolerance towards gender-based violence. Now, the case in South Africa is a good example of male role models as powerful agents of change. And in my foundation, the Mary Foundation, one of our main focus areas is violence against women. And in the beginning of 2015, we invited Brothers for Life to come to Denmark and meet with us and the Danish organisation Dialogue Against Violence, which I referred to. Now, Dialogue Against Violence has developed over a longer period evidence-based methodologies and programs to work with men who want to change their violent behaviour. Now, Brothers for Life now have access to these learnings, and in combination With their role model approach, these two organizations are working together to create a new program targeted at men in South Africa. And for us in Denmark, we have the opportunity to learn more about how to address and involve men in our work. This partnership is an excellent example of the value of international collaboration. Eliminating all forms of violence against women and girls cannot be achieved without joint international, regional, and local action. In September, the UN adopted 17 new Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and 169 targets that provide the blueprint for the world's development over the coming 15 years. Never before have world leaders pledged common actions across such a broad and universal policy agenda that applies to all nations and all people. Women and girls as critical drivers of development have been strongly recognized throughout the agenda, and more specifically by goal number 5, to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. And one of the targets under Goal 5 is to eliminate all forms of violence against all women and girls in public and private spheres, including through the engagement of men and boys. And I strongly welcome the addition of these words, including through the engagement of men and boys, in the declaration by the member states of the UN. In agreeing upon this goal and target, it is recognized that each country commits itself to mobilizing the means to implement the agenda through revitalized global partnerships for sustainable development, the participation of all countries, all stakeholders, and all people. Systematic follow-up and review of implementation will be conducted over the next 15 years at national, regional, and global levels, and this will provide for increased peer learning and sharing of best practices. This will provide a set of global indicators that are being developed to assist this work, and it is acknowledged that efforts will need to be intensified to strengthen statistical capacities in developing countries. The Global Indication Framework will be finalised next March 2016, and will be complemented by indicators at the regional and national levels, which will be developed by the member states. And this framework is absolutely essential to tracking the progress and ensuring that no one is left behind. Achieving gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls will make a crucial contribution to the achievement across all 17 goals. And our ability to achieve truly transformative change and results across all goals is dependent on the progress we achieve for women and girls. A sustainable world cannot exist if one half of humanity continues to be denied their full human rights and opportunities. And with the adoption of the new Sustainable Development Goals, we now have a tool for coordinated international action. The 2030 Agenda has given us a common goal, and now is the time for implementation within families, societies, and countries. Now is the time to transform this agenda into a reality, a new reality for millions of women and girls around the world, a life free of violence. Legislation and enforcement alone are not enough. Changing behaviour and social norms, increased knowledge and understanding, raising awareness and reporting, intensified commitments and investments, and strong global partnerships are all critical to prevention and response. At this conference, we gather and share experience and know-how from all around the world. We add new perspectives on how to prevent and respond to violence. We stand united and therefore strong. My hope is that next time we meet, our progress towards our common goal will be great, and that more men from all over the world will join us on this journey. We need all the voices we can get if we want a world free of violence. It is up to us to create a culture where violence is never accepted and can never be justified. Thank you.